The tavern in Willow Creek had always smelled of roasted meat, wood smoke, and quiet sorrow. On a cold evening when the wind screamed across the plains like a lonely ghost, a man named Samuel Rourke pushed open its creaking doors. His hat was pulled low against the biting chill, his coat heavy with dust from the day's work on his ranch. Behind him, 2 children followed, Emma, age 8, and little Caleb, just 5. They were quiet, not from fear but from the weight of absence that lingered around them like a shadow. Samuel was a widower now. It had been 9 months since Mary passed away, and though the seasons had turned, the ache in his chest hadn't softened. Every night he cooked for the kids at home, every morning he rode out before dawn, and every evening he returned to the same kitchen where her apron still hung by the door. But tonight, something inside him needed a change, a breath of warmth that wasn't haunted by memories. The tavern was alive with the murmur of laughter, the clinking of mugs, and the old piano playing a tune so faint it almost disappeared under the crackle of the fire. Samuel led his children to a corner table, the one near the window where snowflakes began pressing softly against the glass. The waitress, a kind woman named Greta, approached with her usual smile, though it faltered when she saw the empty look in Samuel's eyes. "The usual?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Stew for me. Smaller bowls for the little ones." She glanced at the kids, who sat side by side, too polite to fidget, too young to understand the silence their father carried. "Coming right up," Greta said, and moved away. Samuel's rough hands rested on the table, the knuckles raw from the cold, veins raised beneath sun-worn skin. He looked at his children. "You two doing all right?" Emma nodded. Caleb tried to smile, but his gaze drifted to the empty chair beside his father. Mary's chair. She used to sit there whenever they came to town together, back when laughter had filled the table, when her voice had been the light that drew them home. Samuel felt his throat tighten. He forced a breath, looking away. The tavern's laughter was distant. The world had moved on, and somehow, he hadn't. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the warmth pressed close but couldn't reach him. Then the door opened again. A gust of wind swept through, carrying snow and something else, a presence that seemed to shift the air itself. A woman stepped inside, brushing snow from her shawl. She was not from town, that much was clear. Her coat was simple, travel-worn, but her eyes, clear as morning light, held a quiet courage. She scanned the room, and when her gaze met Samuel's, she hesitated for only a second before walking toward him. "Pardon," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth that didn't seem to belong to the frozen world outside. "Every table's taken. Mind if I share yours?" Samuel looked around. Indeed, the tavern had filled quickly. He could have said no. He wanted to, but Emma was already nodding, and Caleb's face had lit up with the curiosity only a child could show. Samuel gestured to the chair. "Go ahead." The woman sat down, unwrapping her shawl. "Thank you," she said with a small smile. "My name's Clara. Clara Weston." "Samuel Rourke," he replied gruffly. "These are my kids, Emma and Caleb." "Nice to meet you both," she said, her eyes softening as she looked at them. "Quite the snowstorm out there. You're lucky to have made it in before it got worse." "We live close," Samuel answered. "Ranch about 5 miles west." "A rancher," she said, as if the word carried quiet admiration. "That explains the dust on your coat." Emma giggled, the first small laugh Samuel had heard from her in days, and Clara smiled at her warmly. "And what do you raise out there?" "Horses. Cattle. Both," Samuel said. "Trying to keep the place running since my wife passed." The words came out rough, unwilling. Clara's smile faded into something gentle, understanding. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Loss like that doesn't fade quick." "It don't fade at all," Samuel murmured, then looked away. Greta brought their food, setting down steaming bowls. The aroma filled the air. Rich broth, carrots, tender beef. But Samuel barely tasted it. Yet something about Clara's presence changed the table. She asked Emma about her school, laughed at Caleb's clumsy jokes, and even teased Samuel lightly when he spilled a bit of broth. Her laughter was low, melodic, not loud like most folks who tried too hard to fill silence. Hers settled into it, as if it belonged there. An hour passed like a breath. Samuel couldn't remember the last time supper felt like this, alive. He found himself telling her about the ranch, about Mary's garden that still grew wildflowers near the porch, about the stubborn mare that refused to be tamed. Clara listened with genuine warmth, her eyes never drifting away as if his words mattered. When the plates were cleared, she rose and said, "Thank you for sharing your table, Mr. Rourke, and your stories." Samuel stood as well, an old habit of respect he thought he'd lost. "You're welcome." She wrapped her shawl and smiled at the children. "Good night, Emma. Caleb, be good to your pa." They waved shyly. She turned toward the door, stepping into the swirling snow until her figure disappeared in the white. Samuel stared after her, a strange heaviness filling his chest, not sorrow this time, but something quieter. Hope, perhaps. That night, after tucking the children into bed, he stood on the porch of his ranch. The wind howled through the bare trees, and the stars shimmered like ice. He thought about Clara's laughter, her eyes that seemed to see through the pain he never spoke of. He didn't know why it mattered, but it did. The next evening, he found himself returning to the tavern, though he hadn't planned to. Maybe, deep down, he hoped she'd be there again. She wasn't. Days passed, each one colder than the last. Life returned to its steady rhythm of chores and loneliness. Until one morning, as he saddled his horse, a wagon approached the ranch. The same woman stepped down, her shawl fluttering in the wind. "Morning, Mr. Rourke," she said, smiling. "I'm looking for work. Heard you could use an extra hand." He blinked. "You work on a ranch? I've done harder," she said simply. "Besides, I cook better than I ride. And your children looked like they could use a proper breakfast." Samuel chuckled before he realized it. The sound startled him. "All right, Miss Weston, let's see what you can do." By noon, the house smelled of biscuits and coffee instead of silence. The children laughed again, chasing each other through the kitchen. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching Clara move with easy grace, sunlight catching in her hair. Something in him stirred. An ache, yes, but also warmth. Life had been gray for so long. Now, it had color again. That night, as the family gathered around the table, Samuel looked at the empty chair beside him, the one that used to belong to Mary, and for the first time, he didn't feel guilty that someone else sat there. Clara smiled, passing him the bread. "Eat, Mr. Rourke. Tomorrow's work won't wait." He nodded, his heart strangely light. Outside, snow continued to fall across the plains, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, laughter filled the house once more. It wasn't the same as before, it never could be, but maybe, just maybe, it could be something new. Something healing. And as the fire flickered and the children's laughter danced through the air, Samuel found himself whispering, "Thank you, Clara." She didn't hear him, but maybe she didn't need to. Some gratitude was meant to stay unspoken, glowing quietly in the heart. Winter lingered longer than usual that year, draping Willow Creek in endless white. But inside Samuel Rourke's ranch, warmth had returned. Not just the kind from firewood crackling in the hearth, but the kind that seeped quietly into a man's heart, uninvited yet welcome. Clara had been there for nearly 3 months now. What began as a few days of helping with meals turned into mornings filled with laughter and evenings that no longer felt hollow. The children adored her. Emma followed her like a shadow, learning to knead dough and plait her hair like Clara did. Little Caleb would bring her wildflowers even when the fields were still sleeping under frost. And Samuel, he tried to convince himself she was just a helping hand, someone kind enough to fill the silence. But every time she smiled, something in him unraveled. One evening, after supper, Samuel stepped outside to fetch more firewood. The air was biting, stars scattered like silver dust. He looked through the frosted window and saw Clara by the fire, mending Caleb's torn mittens, humming softly while Emma brushed the old mare's mane near the barn. He felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. And that scared him more than the loneliness ever did. Later, as Clara stacked dishes, she noticed his gaze lingering. "Something on your mind, Mr. Rourke?" she asked lightly. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I've been meaning to thank you. For everything you've done. For the kids." She smiled, that same quiet, unassuming smile that seemed to soften even the coldest nights. "You don't need to thank me, Samuel. We all need somewhere to belong." Her words lingered long after she went to her room. Somewhere to belong. He hadn't realized until now that he'd been searching for the same thing. Not in land, not in work, but in warmth. The spring thaw came slowly. The snow melted into rivers, the fields turned green, and life returned to the ranch. Clara worked beside Samuel in the stables, brushing the horses, helping mend fences, laughing when mud splattered her dress. "She's tougher than half the ranch hands I've hired," Samuel joked one day, and Clara tossed a playful glare over her shoulder. "And yet you still think I can't saddle a horse properly," she teased. He chuckled, a deep, genuine sound that made Emma clap her hands in delight. The children had never seen their father laugh so freely, but as days turned longer, something else began to stir beneath the surface, an unspoken question hanging between them. Samuel could feel it every time their hands brushed, every time their eyes met and lingered too long. Then one Sunday afternoon, Clara stood by the porch railing, watching the horizon. The fields shimmered under the setting sun, and the air smelled like new beginnings. Samuel joined her, wiping his hands on a rag. "You ever think about leavin'?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, the light catching in her eyes. "I used to," she said. "Before I came here, I was always running. Thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to face what I'd lost." He turned to her. "You lost someone too." Clara nodded, her voice steady. "My husband. 5 years ago. He was a good man. But when he died, the world went still. I thought I'd never find purpose again. Until I met your children. Until I met you." The words settled between them like a confession and a prayer. Samuel's breath caught. "Clara, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," she said softly. "Just don't push away what's already here." He looked at her for a long time, the fading sun painting her face in gold. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. For the first time since Mary's passing, he didn't feel guilt, only gratitude that life still had room for light after so much loss. Weeks passed, and the ranch flourished. The cattle were strong, the barn freshly painted, and laughter had become as common as the morning chores. The people in town began to notice how Samuel Rourke, once the quiet widower who sat alone at the tavern, now smiled when he rode into town. How Clara walked beside him, her shawl fluttering, her laughter turning heads. One evening, Greta, the old waitress from the tavern, smiled knowingly when she saw them enter together. "Didn't think I'd see the day you brought company again, Mr. Rourke," she said warmly. Samuel tipped his hat, a rare grin tugging at his lips. "Guess miracles happen when you least expect, Em." They sat at the same corner table where it all began. The children giggled as Greta served their stew. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. Clara sat there, her hand brushing Samuel's as she reached for bread.